This September 11, 2023, we are here with Professor Cliff Rosendahl from Queensland, Australia. What a great pleasure, because Cliff, you are definitely one of the most exotic FotoFinder users, if I may say that, worldwide, because you are a general practitioner. And that is, for us, extremely interesting to hear how it all started. Tell us your story.
Well, I've been a GP for a long time. I started in 1976. In 2004, my brother-in-law had a melanoma, and he went to his GP with this lesion on his thigh, and the GP said it was nothing to worry about, and a year later it had metastasised. And so he never blamed that GP, because he told me that GPs in Australia weren't educated and prepared for that sort of work. So that GP looked after him until the day he died. And my sister, who's his wife, still goes to that GP. But that started me thinking, if GPs weren't trained to do this, but patients depended on GPs to make these decisions, then there was a job to do, getting good at diagnosing things that needed to be diagnosed and teaching GPs how to do it. So that's how it started. That was in 2004. I started in about 2005. My first dermoscope cost me $40,000. It was a Molmax. But then I moved on to handheld dermoscopes and found, in fact, at the time they were much better for the work I was doing. In 2009 I started my PhD, which I finished in 2012. And since then, since I got to retirement age, I've been doing exclusively skin cancer work. I retired from general practice, but not from life. So I just do skin cancer work. And I really enjoy it.
So you are 73 years young and fully passionate and dedicated to skin checks as you retired from GP.
Yeah, and retirement was a great opportunity to do something more interesting.
I love that. Now, tell us a bit about your practice. So how can we imagine that? How many people work there? What is the workflow?
Well, I work in a suburb of Brisbane on the east coast of Australia. And where I work is actually the highest incidence of melanoma in Australia, so therefore in the world. And I have a general practice. I'm a GP. I'm still a GP, always will be. And in that general practice, there more than half of the GPs do general practice, and a number of us just work in skin cancer. And I don't operate anymore. I'm happy to do the diagnostics, apart from nail matrix biopsy, which I enjoy doing. And so I spend 3 days a week seeing patients and working with a nurse who her qualification has to be that she's better than me, and that's how she qualifies to work with me. And her job is to find things that I miss, and she loves doing that. So the workflow is that when a patient comes in for an examination, and if it's a new patient, we allow half an hour. If it's a follow-up patient, we allow 15 minutes or longer, depending on the patient. And after the initial introduction and checking about if their history's changed, with family history of melanoma, or if there's any lesions they're concerned about, then we examine them, and they strip down to their underwear. And they sit on the couch. We pull the curtain across while they get changed, pull the curtain back, they sit on the couch, and I start at the front and the nurse starts at the back. We have the FotoFinder open on their last total body photography. So we encourage every patient who has skin examinations to have baseline total body photography. So while we examine the patient, we refer him to the pictures taken most recently on total body photography. And we've found an increasing number of melanomas purely by seeing that what we're seeing wasn't there before, or it had changed. When we've finished examining the patient sitting up, the patient lies down, face up. And the first thing I do is examine the lymph node patients, because the patients lie down. Then I examine the skin over the top surface of the body. So the nurse examines from the feet coming up, we cross over, and she looks for things that I might have overlooked. And then we roll the patient to the right, to the patient's right, and we examine, starting at the top, I examine the scalp very carefully, moving the hair, because with ladies lying down, you can examine the scalp very easily in that lying down position, not when they're sitting up with the long hair. Then I'll move down, the nurse moves up, and then we lie the patient face down, same thing, top to bottom, bottom to top, and then we lie them on the patient's left. So we roll them like a pig on a spit. And that whole process takes about 10 minutes, a bit longer for some patients. And then my nurse does all the typing on the computer, which is great. So if there's lesions that need treatment, we do a referral to one of my doctors in the practice. She types that up, and that tells them exactly what FotoFinder number it is and what we recommend they do, whether it's excisional biopsy or whatever. And then that ends that interaction. So that's for standard consultations. When we're doing total body photography with detection, the patient has an hour and a half appointment with a nurse before they see me. And she runs the next lot of total body photography. Then spends an hour to an hour and a half actually looking at the images side by side, looking at the ones that computer software has detected, examining with a dermoscope, and then if it's not just a piece of fluff or rubbish, she takes a dermoscopic image and puts a sticky arrow on the skin to show it where it is. So by the time she's done that, not only using the software to detect change, but checking herself, then she sends the patient through to me for their appointment with me, as normal appointment, with each arrow stuck on the lesions that she's photographed. So as we do the examination, the same routine as normal, if we come across each arrow, I make a decision about the lesion. I check the dermoscopy, have a look at the lesion, and I write on the arrow either to discard, to excise, or to monitor. So we're now using total body photography with detection to find the lesions that are worth monitoring. And basically, if it's a real lesion, not just a seborrheic keratosis or pimple, if it's a real lesion, we either excise it or monitor it. So that's the basic workflow.
There are 2 points that are of great interest for us. First of all, at the rate of how many biopsies and excisions you find one melanoma?
That's a very good question, because all of my work is documented on the Skin Cancer Audit Research Database, which is SCARD, right? And when you treat anything on SCARD, you have to submit on the online database why you're doing it. There's 3 options. It's either exclude melanoma, or exclude non-melanoma skin cancer, or not applicable. And that would be, for example, if a patient wanted a harmless dermal nevus removed for cosmetic reasons, no suspicion of malignancy. And so we can see exactly, at any period, for a select period of time, or from when I started back in 2007 recording all this stuff, I can see exactly how many lesions I excised to detect one melanoma. When I started out in 2007, it was about 13.
And today?
1.6. 1.6 to 2.5. And when that happens and you're cutting out a lot less harmless lesions, the concern is always that you might be missing melanomas. So because you can't actually measure sensitivity and specificity without cutting everything out, we use the surrogate of sensitivity of the proportion of melanomas that you excise that are in situ. So the hypothesis is that if you're not missing melanomas, the proportion that's in situ will remain the same or increase. And in my experience, it's actually increased a little bit from 70% to about 78%. So hopefully that means I'm not diagnosing melanomas later.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to measure the percentage in situ is if you exclude anything found the first time you see a patient, because you have no control over that.
Sure.
But we haven't taken that step.
But still, that rate is incredibly good compared to the average you have here in Europe. Okay, so we have got here 6, 7 when it comes to the biopsy.
I don't think there's any other study apart from SCARD that measures that prospectively.
Mm.
They look at the number of pigmented things they cut out compared to the number of melanomas. These are the studies that we refer to when we published it. But as far as I know, the Skin Cancer Research Database is the only one where there's a prospective declaration of intent.
The next question is, you mentioned your nurse is, she's got to be better than you. That's a very interesting statement. Tell us, how do you select the nurse and how do you train the nurse? Like, what are the criteria?
Well, the criteria are more personality. Like, we have registered nurses, so obviously they're intelligent. They've done a degree, right? And some nurses love the work and some it's just like another nursing job. But for someone to do a job really well, they've got to really like doing it. So we have nurses in the practice and they do general nursing duties like giving kids vaccinations, giving patient care plans, assisting doctors in the theatre. And when a nurse sees what's being done in my examination room and expresses his interest in that, that's a signal to me that this nurse will possibly enjoy that work. That's how I select the nurses. They're just nurses in the practice who then I say, they express an interest in diagnostic work and I ask them to have a go, and it becomes very evident the speed at which they accumulate their skills. People do well what they enjoy. You've got to select people that want to do that job. And that's the same with doctors. Like I tell doctors that when I teach, my aim is not to save lives, my aim is to help them enjoy their work more, because if I do that, the rest will take care of itself. And so with nurses, the same thing. So the nurses basically self-select. I have had people come to me and say they'd like that sort of work, and that's a good indication too. So basically I say, if a doctor wants to enjoy his work with skin diagnostics more, one option is to employ a nurse. Now, before I employed a nurse, I examined a patient. What I didn't see didn't exist. But I soon learned that that was not correct, because when I had a nurse working with me and she was finding things that I hadn't even suspected because I hadn't put my dermoscope on them, then I realised that I was missing stuff all the time. So the business plan is theoretically whatever the nurse finds extra, and it's often the very, very early BCC, the work generated by that covers the wages of the nurse. But also she does a lot of stuff to reduce my workload, the typing and all that part of it. And of course, when a patient comes in and they say they've had this thing cut off last year, you say to the nurse, could you please get those results? And she makes a few notes, goes out, gives it to the receptionist, comes back in, and that's all taken care of. So there's all those little things that you don't think about that make your work flow much, much easier. And for example, with the total body photography with detection, I wouldn't have the temperament to sit down and compare for an hour and a half sets of images. I couldn't do that. There's no way in the world I could do that. But my nurses are happy to do that.
I understand. That is a very good point. I mean, to a large extent, the efficiency of your workflow depends on the selection and training of your nurses. Something that is neglected in many hospitals, many clinics that we have over here, because the doctors would not trust anybody else. They would do the entire job themselves, and that way they cannot see as many patients.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, a very important point that you raised here. Let's go to the next part of this interview, which is, for me, the future. What's going to happen in the future? We are facing this lack of resources, okay? But the number of doctors being available for skin check is absolutely not growing in parallel with the number of patients that are actually concerned about their skin. That means we must find a solution to reduce the waiting time for the waiting list of patients in several countries. We have got in Germany maybe a better situation than in UK. Countries are different. But eventually, we see that the number of residents, when they are finishing their studies, many of them decide to go rather to the aesthetic field than to what we do, actually. So that is basically the large challenge. And we think eventually what happened to Australia, Australia is an example for the rest of the world. So what happens in Australia could be copied to a large extent for the rest of the world in terms of efficiency. So to my understanding, a large number of GPs are doing skin checks in Australia. And this is the fact, right?
Well, the number of dermatologists is very limited. And so when you think dermatologists have lots of things they have to do, they have to look after inflammatory diseases, psoriasis, allergies, eczema, aesthetics, and these things take up a lot of their time. And the result of that is that general practitioners manage the majority of skin cancer and melanoma in Australia. In fact, in Queensland, a recent study showed over 70% of melanomas were managed by general practitioners. And that has been helped by the fact that general practitioners are fairly well rewarded for surgical work. So they get the same fee for doing surgery on the skin as a specialist would. So this has helped GPs move into that role that the dermatologists have largely withdrawn from. But the problem is GPs, as I explained earlier, haven't been prepared for that. So a GP who's been through university, who's been made a fellow of the college through the training program for GPs, I can tell you that when they come to my courses, they have a lot to learn, purely because this hasn't been taught to them. And so there's a role for educational bodies like the University of Queensland, which now has a master's degree in skin cancer, now also has a short form credential, which is much less expensive. Like the short form credential, a nurse can do it, you can do it, you don't need any qualifications. You just need a desire to know more about how skin cancer is diagnosed. And for $1,650, one semester, 5 flexible hours a week, all online, you can get a fairly good education in the basics of skin cancer diagnostics. And this book, of course, is the textbook for that course. And so these things, there are organisations like HealthCert that educate doctors, including mainly GPs, and organisations like the Skin Cancer Symposiums in New Zealand. I've just been to Stockholm with them. We talked to 110 half dermatologists, half GPs for 2 days. They loved it. They've already organised for us to come back next year. And we also go to London. So there's a big market for GPs wanting to learn how to treat, and dermatologists in Europe. GPs in Australia, dermatologists and GPs in Europe, wanting to learn how to diagnose and manage skin cancer. And these guys are motivated. So if there's people out there that are coming through the university system that don't want to do it, there's plenty of GPs that do if they're shown how much fun it can be and how rewarding it can be.
So Cliff, tell me, based on your subjective opinion, how much time does it take to bring an average GP here in Europe at a level, acceptable level of confidence in diagnosis of skin cancer? How much training do we need, and how much time does it take to bring that GP on that level?
Okay. Well, it's been shown in the studies here in Europe that if you introduce dermatoscopy without training, the accuracy gets worse. It's like when you start scuba diving and everything is wonderful. And so when you're using a dermatoscope for the first time, everything looks scary because you're seeing something magnified, you're seeing a millimetre into the skin, not just the surface, but into the skin. All these beautiful colours of invasive melanomas and BTC, all the sky blue colours and this sort of thing. And so your specificity goes right down, start cutting everything out. But with training, it's been shown here that even a basic training course,
which takes 2 days?
Yes, followed up with online follow-up. I recently reviewed a paper for a French group that showed that a short training period was not inferior to a longer training period as long as you had the follow-up, right? What GPs and dermatologists need to do is when they first get a dermatoscope, look at lots and lots of normal things. Look at the warts, look at the seborrheic keratoses, look at the hemangiomas, look at the nevi, because there's 5 basic groups of benign things. There's nevi, SEBK, dermatofibroma, hemangioma, and sebaceous hyperplasia. And you can look at lots of those in a day because patients have them. And you can rapidly become an expert at recognising benign things. And then you don't agonise over each of those. You can move quickly and you tell yourself what it is as you look at it. And then when you see something that doesn't fit the symmetrical pattern of one of those 5 things, then you stop. And then you put on your algorithm or whatever your method is, and that makes the work a lot less scary. Dermatologists and GPs often only look at what the patient brings to their attention. And then they're not prepared because they don't know what normal looks like. But you can rapidly become an expert at looking at normal, recognising normal things like you recognise your mother's face. You don't need an algorithm to work that out. It's the same thing. Same thing.
Wonderful.
And that's all in the book.
No, that's, for every training you obviously need academic backup, a book, a textbook that guides you, and that is our intention. Is the collaboration that we're gonna have, and we want to develop is based on finding a concept that is attractive to GPs. At FotoFinder, we are developing software, hardware tools for GPs. Is a different workflow. Is not just about really body mapping. That's very intensive work. But you talked earlier about a study that you have done, human with machine. I mean, the human with the support of a machine would perform a lot better. Specify that. I mean, we talk about artificial intelligence tools, well-trained tools that are out there. FotoFinder is one of the providers. You believe well-trained GP in combination with AI would definitely add a positive contribution to early diagnosis.
Well, the paper that Harold Kittler, Phil Shandell and others authored, which I was honoured to be a co-author on, my contribution just being images to train computers, that showed that a human plus a computer was more effective than a human alone or a computer alone. And it was found in that study that while support from AI helped all beginners, it only helped experts when they weren't confident, which is what you would expect, because an expert doesn't need the opinion of a machine. The expert's used to getting emails from colleagues, what do you think of this? But when experts took longer than 3 seconds to mark their opinion on a particular lesion, then the AI support was helpful. So in my opinion, AI is not something to be built into a machine to tell you yes, cut, no, don't cut, with every lesion. The doctor needs to use his own powers of pattern recognition to recognise obviously benign things and not waste the energy of a machine, right? Also, you don't want the doctor to become a zombie just relying on a machine. The artificial intelligence should be used to support the doctor when the doctor wants a second opinion. When the doctor thinks, hang on, I don't know what this is, I can't recognise as one of the 5 common benign things, I can't recognise as a melanoma or a BCC, I need assistance. And that's when the AI should be flicked on. It shouldn't be on for every lesion, in my opinion.
Otherwise, it would be also time inefficient. I mean, it would cost a lot of time.
Well, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
So why, evolution doesn't waste energy, right? Evolution conserves energy. So when melanocytes and nevus descend into the dermis, they lose their pigment producing capability because it's of no relevance in the dermis. But when a malignant melanocyte goes to the dermis, it doesn't follow any rules. It wastes energy and produces pigment. So we are like that. We shouldn't waste energy, of a machine or ourselves. You don't use any method to recognise your mother's face. Right? You look at it, g'day mum. It's the same thing, right? You don't waste energy recognising a seborrheic keratosis. But you've got to realise that a little melanoma can develop right in contact and collision with a seborrheic keratosis. So you've got to always stay awake and alert. If you put the AI on the 7K, it'll say benign. It won't recognise the little tiny melanoma 2 or 3 millimetres diameter growing off to one side. You have to do that yourself. And that's how it should work.
One of the main motivations to invite and have Cliff here with us is, as I heard his talks before in events, he is a true environmentalist. He reads about it, he talks about it. And even his approach in mole mapping is an environmentally friendly approach, as he mentioned. And I think eventually we all will live a lot better if we follow that philosophy. It's a philosophy in it. You become better at your job, you become happier, I suppose, right? And that is, in 73, he's full of energy, he full motivated, travels around the world. I think beyond the dermoscopy part of it, Cliff, you are an idol for many of us who work with you, also all the doctors, medical doctors that have become your friends. Is a big part of that is not only your expertise and whatever they learn from you, it's also your personality. And that's beautiful.
Very generous of you to say.
And that is for us a great honor to have you here among us. This interview is going to be published partly written in FotoFinder newsletter and magazine that we have yearly published. The recording I will share with our own team, because in my opinion what you mentioned is a very efficient way of explaining the problem, the actual problem, and how you solve it, and your recommendations how we could improve our environment here in Europe are very valuable for us. And therefore, whoever is watching this video, we could watch it even several times, because there is a lot of important content hidden in it.
I'll just add a little bit about the maps I was talking about earlier. In Australia we have the Australian Cancer Atlas. And this is an atlas relevant to every cancer, thyroid, bowel, lung, breast, whatever. And when they have the atlas, they have one side that shows the incidence, it's like a heat map of the incidence of the particular cancer. And it shows areas with high incidences in red. And then the other map, it shows the area of excess mortality. And it shows the lowest excess mortality is blue. Now, in Australia, it just so happens that the highest incidence of melanoma is right in the eastern corner of Australia where I live, which is where Brisbane is the centre. It's the epicentre of melanoma incidence in the world. And quite unique to melanoma, on the other map that shows excess mortality, that is the area of the lowest excess mortality in Australia and therefore in the world. That isn't the case for any other malignancy. That correlation doesn't occur for any other malignancy. Now, we published, and what David Whiteman, who's a well-known epidemiologist in Australia, stated, he said that area where the highest diagnosis rate is where the highest overdiagnosis is occurring. Overdiagnosis being the diagnosis of melanomas, which are true melanomas, but which will never kill the patient in their lifetime. We don't know which those lesions are, prospectively, right? But he said it looks as though in Australia, the price of reducing mortality is overdiagnosis. In the area where you're diagnosing lots of melanomas, including ones that turn out to be harmless, you're actually reducing death.
I think there is nowhere worldwide, there is no place that is comparable with Queensland, and it's the only place where you can prove that statement.
Now, I'll tell you another thing, and this is which we haven't published. I've just got the scarred heat maps showing with the skin cancer at recent data where most of the activity is, and the epicentre of scarred activity in Australasia is exactly the same area. So this is where GPs are diagnosing skin cancers and melanomas, GPs, because scarred is primarily general practitioners. So that's the area where there's greatest overdiagnosis, where there's the least mortality.
Wonderful, and that is why we love this job, because what we do, improving the technology, improving the images, improving the workflows, is a direct contribution to saving lives, and that is where the passion really comes from for what we do here at FotoFinder. And finding people like you, Cliff, is an additional motivation for us to continue. And for that, I really thank you that you took the time to come to Germany and visit us. Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks for this wonderful interview, Cliff. Thank you very much.
Would you like me to sign the book?
Oh yeah, we cut that video and we would start a new one. I am quite convinced, Julia, when